Elizabeth Gilbert gives her praise of Kaufman's book, saying, "Humanity at its finest is merely what she is offering here, and we could all use a bit more of that in our lives." In her own words, quote, "We've given in to gravity. We've forgotten how to move through life with grace." Kaufman details the condition of overwhelmedness in 21st century life, but she offers an alternative, somewhere between the graceful Washington ballet dancers and the grace of Cary Grant to forgive wine spilled on his lap by a nervous Audrey Hepburn. An element of grace must be explored that showcases the beauty of the everyday and the ability to see grace where it is often never perceived to be present. This type of grace is an active element in which, quote, "Once grace enters the room, our cold, hard, tottering world becomes a better place in which to live." Kaufman explores this notion of grace through the muses of Cary Grant, Smokey Robertson, Roger Federer, Nelson Mandela, Margot Fontaine, Amy Purdy, Beyoncé, and many others. The Art of Grace is an arresting read that begs you to take a step back from the world you think you live in and witness grace in others and yourself in ways you never imagined. As she claims, grace is faded and it is ripe for rediscovery. Sarah Kaufman is the dance critic of the Washington Post. As the Washington Post chief dance critic since 1996, she has applied her eye for grace and movement everywhere, literally seeing the Tour de France as an art, analyzing as art, also analyzing politicians' body language, examining Lady Gaga as a cultural phenomenon. In 2010, Kaufman became the first dance critic in 35 years to win the Pulitzer Prize. She's an avid swimmer and cyclist, a yoga junkie, an overindulger in pop culture and caffeine. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Kaufman.
Wow. Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this, can you hear me? Is it, no? Did I hear a no? I'll speak loud. Thank you, Davis, for that amazing introduction. That was really, I love to hear my work kind of reinterpreted and brought back. It's refreshing. And thank you, everyone, for coming out. I'm so grateful to see you all here on a wet night for this live event, you know, in the flesh, happening in real time. It's kind of amazing. You all left on a weeknight and got here, and that's not easy. We live pretty effortful lives. You know, we rush around and we're updating our social feeds. We're overwhelmed. We have a lot of work to do. We're really, really busy. And the busyness takes a toll. You know, when we finally get up from our desk, we might feel in our stiff and achy recovery that grace is kind of out of reach. And I'm here to tell you that it is not. It is within the reach of all of us. Grace is very democratic. It's a fundamental human quality, and it is based on 6 years of research that I have, with the greatest of delight and pleasure, because this is a really happy subject, plowed into this book. I can tell you it is, from the point of view of science, and even from the point of view of evolution, and from the point of view of physiology, we are meant to be graceful, and we're meant to appreciate grace. We are social animals, and we are physical beings, and grace is the best of both of those. It points to the best, it elicits the best of those two parts of ourselves. In this book, to write the kind of book that I wanted to read and that I could not find, I needed to combine the social and the physical. And so that's what I've done here. So it's about the whole enchilada, everything in there, even a religious chapter. So I have not left that out. And in fact, that's one of my favorite chapters because I learned a lot. we are meant to enjoy grace, but when we look around, it doesn't mean it's always present, right? We may not always see it. We may feel grace has kind of gotten up and left us to our own devices. One of my favorite quotes from John F. Kennedy came from a speech that he made about support for the arts shortly before he died. And he said, "I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty." And I look forward to that too. I don't know if we are actually there yet. I think we may be a little bit afraid of grace. You know, we've kind of put a higher value on things like honesty, bluntness, brusqueness, these kinds of things that can hurt people's feelings and be a little hard to take sometimes, and yet we're constantly told, let it all hang out and express yourself, and when maybe what is needed instead is a little bit more polish. Maybe that feels elitist. Maybe that's one reason why grace has kind of fallen by the wayside since John F. Kennedy actually put the word grace into a speech. I don't know if that's figured in many speeches lately, although President Obama gave the best speech of his administration not too long ago when he built up an entire speech on the idea of grace when he gave the eulogy for the pastor who was killed along with all the others in the church in South Carolina. And he actually sang Amazing Grace. So it has a lot of power over us. So what is grace? I mean, we all come to it with different perceptions. Grace can be in someone's elegant walk, in a very smooth and polished physical presence, a way of moving. It can be making someone feel comfortable, a kind of a warmth, putting people at ease. You may think of it as divine love, something that helps us get through things, a kind of, a sense that the universe is compassionate and understanding. I'm going to read I'm going to read what we may think of as kind of a first notion of grace, and that is the three graces of classical Greece. The Greeks called them the charites, and they were the progeny of the world's coolest parents. Mom was Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Dad was Dionysus, god of wine and wallbangers. The charites were the personifications of beauty, festivity, and joy, celebrated by Homer, Pindar, and the other poets. The Romans renamed them the gratiae, from which we get the word grace. Gifted with charm, high spirits, and the desire to please, these divine young ladies had the simple task of enhancing the enjoyment of life, of bringing about ease. Who couldn't use more of that? And yet, though grace seems like it should be natural, when we look around us and at ourselves, we tend to see the jarring angles, the glitches, the raw edges, the jerks. But grace is within the reach of all of us. Neuroscientists and movement specialists agree it is within the capabilities of everyone. It's made up of a poised and relaxed body, smooth and efficient motion, attentiveness, compassion. There's a contented silence to grace. It avoids what is loud and intrusive and what offends the eye. One of my favorite passages of grace, although the word wasn't actually used in this passage, but I think we all can relate to The Great Gatsby. It's kind of the book that unites us, as Maureen Corrigan put it in her own book about Gatsby. At the moment when the narrator of The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway, first meets Gatsby is when something happens that I think we would all recognize as grace, or at least we would all recognize for how we would want someone to perceive us, to look at us. Carraway is a misfit among the moneyed Long Island social set at this party he's attended. He's never met Gatsby yet, although he's been invited to his party. In his impatience to put a face to the name, he finds himself making the innocent, if awkward, mistake of lightly griping about the evening to the host himself. When Carraway realizes his blunder, you can imagine his hot shame, his guts turning to mud, and you expect Gatsby to express a little frostiness. Yet he does the opposite. In Gatsby's response, Fitzgerald pinpoints the quality of grace that made this most enduring of American protagonists truly great. This is what Fitzgerald wrote. He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced or seemed to face the whole external world for an instant and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that at your best you hope to convey. So I love that because I guess, you know, it contains the physical and the emotional. And as a dance critic, that's how I perceive life. But it's not just me, it's how we all understand the world. Even though we may not realize it, we are, you know, we're moving our bodies through the world, our instruments, and we take in a lot of information through that, emotionally. Physically, we have such an impact on one another through our physical presence. And using that is accessing grace. You know, if you use that in the way that Gatsby did to warm and reassure somebody, to make them feel at ease. It's what I love about the subject. And when I started out making lists of qualities associated with grace, people who I thought were graceful, and then I tried to reduce and bring about a lowest common denominator of all of them and what really summed up grace. And it's what I came up with is that it's really the quality of putting our best selves forward. Generosity, compassion, ease in how we move ourselves, in how we interact with others, in moving through life. So this book is a collection of stories. In fact, it's my attempt to bear witness to grace, to various acts of grace, physical, social, spiritual, everyday, fantastic magnificence on the playing field, on the stage, on the street corner, in a coffee shop. And I think that by noticing and appreciating these moments, we can generate them ourselves. One of these moments that I thought was just fantastic, given the context, involves Roger Federer, who, by the way, when I spoke with people, various people I talked to consider graceful, his name came up the most. It came up even with the director of the New York City Ballet, Peter Martins. Unprompted, I just simply asked him, who do you think is graceful? And he said, it's not all the ballerinas I've ever seen. It's not all the dancers I've ever seen. It's Roger Federer. Turns out he's a giant tennis fan. But there's something about Federer. You know, what is it? He has such a quality about him that in 2012 at Wimbledon, when he was creaming the local favorite, the national hero, Andy Murray, who, as a Scotsman, was their hope, so hoped for to win, that Kate Middleton, you know, royalty, the Rolling Stones, they were all there. Everyone was there pulling for Andy Murray. And Federer crushed their hearts one by one. And yet, they didn't hate him. They loved him. They roared their appreciation. He crushed their hearts, and he filled their hearts. It was amazing when you read about the commentary. And the passage I have about Federer, I'll just read a bit of it. Even in their disappointment, spectators were awed by what unspooled on the grass court. Federer's flowing game, undulating and continuous. Federer sprinting full tilt to the net to make a point, skating backward to unfurl his forehand. Federer bouncing spongily side to side as if he were inside a moon bounce, gravity touching him as lightly as the laws of nature. To read about it, this was no ordinary athletic triumph brought about through strength and suffering. Sports writers didn't credit the outcome to muscular power or to aggressiveness or iron will. They described it in transcendent terms, calling Federer's win artistic, increasingly miraculous, an impossible display of perfection. And on sports pages on both sides of the Atlantic, one word recurred, as it has throughout Federer's career: grace. The debate on Federer's place in the history of tennis greats is far from settled, but this much is certain. His gracefulness in his form, his movement, the quality of his game is unmatched. The shapes he creates in space are organic and full. You see this in his arching jump with toes pointed, in his oceanic surge forward, in the winged sweep of his forehand. The way he moves is almost lyrical, with a fluid, continuous motion and rhythm. He centers his weight right over his feet, racing with ease in those crab-like side steps despite the change in the game's tempo. Wide straddle, plant the legs, then stop. His arrested motion registers clean and crisp. We see his position before he moves on, just the way a dance captain would want it. You know, essentially what he has is this great sense of finish. But you know, we're not going to be like Federer. I mean, that's unusual. What can we take from that? The appreciation of Roger Federer, at least for me, it makes me feel better about the whole human race when I watch him. I mean, don't you agree? Maybe you don't like Federer, maybe you prefer Nadal. It could be, you know, you may love LeBron. I prefer Julius Erving. But if you see a gracefulness in there, it's inspiring. And what we take from that is the sense of wanting to be better ourselves. I mean, like I say, it may be so subtle you don't realize it. But this is the effect of grace, is this uplift, this uplifting sense that I am now going to stride into my kitchen and turn off my blender with that kind, you know? It's like, whoa, you get this empowerment. The awesome thing about grace is that it's not only beautiful and inspiring to watch, but it's good for you. Graceful posture, graceful movement is the right way to move. It's the healthy way to move. So this sense of being lifted and buoyant, you know, space in your spine, space in your chest, that's that's the healthy posture. So if you aim for grace, you're doing yourself a lot of good. And I guess you could say there's a bit of an instruction manual tucked in here subtly. But I do talk about the physical because that's the other part of grace that we're leaving behind. Not only a kind of a coarseness in some of our manners and some of the way we may see people treating each other, but a coarseness in regards to our own instrument. You know, this is your instrument, and believe me, it wears down, and gravity weighs on us, and body parts are very expensive. They're really expensive to take care of. So moving with grace, all right, what does that mean? You know, part of it is just moving. If you talk to neuroscientists, they cannot explain Roger Federer. They can't explain Margot Fontaine. They can't explain Nadia Comaneci. They can't explain LeBron. Nobody can. But they can tell you that the more you do whatever it is you want to do physically, the better you'll get at it. So if you want to just start with walking, the more you walk, the easier it will be. If you're thinking about grace, you know, if you're thinking about a lightness and a buoyancy and breathing. Grace is kind of this answer to everything. You know, I mean, what would you say if I said it's the solution to everything? But think about it. If you go into some kind of difficult situation, maybe with your boss or with your employees or with your teenager, and you think, I'm going to be graceful. You're going to be calm. You're going to be poised. You're going to listen to them. You know, you're going to show some compassion. You're going to let them speak, as the ancients have told us through the ages, because grace has been written about for millennium. There, in the introduction, I talk about an ancient Egyptian manuscript, our very first book. The text of all humanity is a 4,500-year-old set of hieroglyphics about conducting yourself, moving through life, how to get along with people, from an ancient Egyptian vizier to his son. And he talks about being bright-faced, humble, generous, kind. Kindness is a man's memorial, he says. The kind have a greater claim to posterity than the cruel. So if you take this into a situation with you and you endeavor to be graceful, you're going to walk out of there better than you walked in. You know, it really does. I feel like it's a worldview that's a bit missing, but that we can recapture. I am going to end with one last passage. I guess you've probably picked up on the fact that this isn't just a book, this is a mission. The point is this: step into the stream of life, be carried away, and enjoy it. In a recent conversation about grace, the celebrated Italian ballerina Alessandra Ferri let me in on what she considers the secret to her country's reputation for relaxed, sunny ease. There's less fear about enjoying and taking risks, she said, and that's a freedom. She's right, and that freedom comes by choice. You achieve grace, inner grace and outer grace, because you want to. It's all in your grasp. Some measure of ease in your body, elegance in your appearance, and ease and enjoyment among others can be cultivated with a little desire. It starts with observation, by being in the midst. Notice and be aware of the grace around you, in your neighborhood, in the park, in what you see on social occasions, in works of art, or in your travels. And I said I would end on this, but I didn't want to end before I mentioned what a lot of you may already know. Today is the 60th anniversary of Rosa Parks' act of defiance in Montgomery, Alabama, when she refused to give up her seat on the bus. And that was an astonishing moment of grace. She carried that out with such grace through all the turmoil and all the violent upheavals of the civil rights movement. Her act, which is probably what most of us think of when we think of that struggle, was carried out with calm, serenity, quietness, and poise. She sat on that bus and she didn't get up when the bus driver walked over to her, asked her several times, and she refused to get up. She wasn't rigid. She wasn't hostile. She simply sat calmly. He was so flustered, he went to call his supervisor. He didn't know what to do with this woman. That's an incredible power. And when he came back to her and said, "You need to get up or I'm going to call the police and you'll be arrested," she gave him permission. She said, "You may do that." So, she was courteous. It's astounding. When you think about it, it kind of gives me chills. Because, I'm not impressed with aggressiveness and power. I think a lot of us are so tired of that. Aren't we tired of that? That just like it's overwhelming. But what is so impressive is this stunning self-possession that she had, and that quiet fortitude that allowed her to preserve her dignity. She transcended the moment. She saw the big picture. And now, look where we are. So there's many aspects to grace. I think it's something that's worth exploring and examining. It's a bit ephemeral. As a dance critic, I'm kind of used to the ephemeral. And so I have tried to make it more concrete while keeping the mystery. And if it's still mystifying after all this, I'll be happy to take your questions.
If you'll walk to the mics, please.
Well, Sarah, that's a brilliant presentation, and I really look forward to reading this book. And I feel so grateful to know you, and to know your family, and to know a little bit about your career. And you've done a marvelous job of explaining the physical aspects of grace. And being a yoga person and being a tennis person, I really totally identified with everything you said. And I'm sure I'll learn more from the book, but I already have a very clear idea of the physical aspect of grace. What I want to draw you out on is the emotional and spiritual aspect. Having just gone through Thanksgiving and focused a lot on gratitude in order to make toast at the dinner table, and focused on those things associated with a spiritual inner peace, I wanted you to speak about that and ask and answer the question of how does gratitude relate to grace?
Yeah, gratitude is everything. It's realizing that what you have is enough, and quelling the desire, quelling the hunger. I think we wake up sometimes thinking, I didn't get enough sleep, I don't have enough time to do what I have to do today. And instead being grateful brings about a calm, because there's so much around to be grateful for. A priest that I spoke to for this book actually said his idea of a saint is somebody who recognized every moment of the day as a moment of grace. And the word grace and gratitude come from the same root in Latin, gratiae, which was the Latin translation of the Greek charite. So they're deeply connected. I mean, gratitude is what allows you to enjoy life, because it's all around you and you're enjoying the moment. You're not seeking something else. You're not desiring, or think your thoughts aren't on what's coming up or on your phone or, your conversation. It's on the moment that's right here. I'm grateful for this moment and I'm taking it all in. So it's the awareness. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kaufman, very much. Very interesting. I have a question about the extent to which the components of grace get united together in the same person. You mentioned Roger Federer on the court, but in fact, after the match, he's always very graceful as well.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is it common for the physical and the emotive and the social and cultural components of grace to be united in the same person? Or is it more frequent for somebody to be physically very graceful and a jerk?
Yeah.
How does that work empirically with human beings?
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question, and I think it's there's a spectrum. It's obviously much. There's a creaky floorboard here, so I don't want it to be picking up the sound. I'll move a little bit away. Well, okay, can't do it. I'll just stand still. There is it's more delicious when they're united, and I do talk about people where it is united, like Cary Grant, who's kind of my guide through the book, united those qualities. He was compassionate and brave and courageous and warm off stage, just as he was brave and courageous and smooth and elegant on screen. Roger Federer, as you rightly noted, had both. Some people don't. I mean, one of the examples in here I title The Problem of Joe DiMaggio. Graceful on the field, unquestioned. Graceful off the field, not so much. He had trouble with his own celebrity, and he didn't have the lightness about it. He didn't have the calm and the ease that a Cary Grant or a Roger Federer have with their own prestige, their own position in the world. So it's not always united.
Sarah, thank you very much for your very interesting set of remarks. I had a question. Since you spent so much time on this, you've obviously dug around into different cultures and the like. I was wondering if you could tell us 2 or 3 of the cultures that you've taken a look at that you feel put a real emphasis on grace, whether physical or emotionally or personality-wise. I think that would be interesting to know your thoughts on that.
So going back to the Renaissance, the Italians were held up as, the ideal of grace. There were some monster bestsellers of the Renaissance that were conduct books written about how to live your life, how to be in the world, by Italians, by Italian poets and philosophers, and they became just, huge international bestsellers and set off this craze for Italian manners. And you can still find them today, and they're magnificent, and I cite them a lot in this book. So just as Michelangelo and Raphael were perfecting the human form in paintings and in sculptures, there were Italian artists, poets, writers who were attempting to perfect human behavior and human manners through writing. And that's what these conduct books became. One of the foundational conduct books of American society was actually written by an Englishman, of course. We wanted to throw off the English, but we still liked their way of living. And he, Lord Chesterfield, raved about the French. And I think that we can still acknowledge that the French, he called the French, I think he called it the seat of grace. Again, that's another source that I cite in this book. But I think that we can also recognize that, both the Italians and the French have a ingrained tradition of putting your best self forward, getting yourself together before you step out of the house. A little self-control, polish. Self-control seems a little difficult, so I like the word polish. But not letting either yourself as you tumble out of bed or the words as they may first want to tumble out of your mouth, not letting those go, but rounding them and softening them and polishing them a bit. In America, we love our casualness, and that's really cool. But I think that can become a bit, that can overflow. Those cultures still have more of a sense of reining in, focusing on others, and a little bit more polish. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, good. Thank you very much.